Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Quarry Borough Council's Climate Change Scrutiny Panel, 30th of June 2020. Welcome to the members of the press and of the public watching this meeting live. This is a meeting being held in public, but it's not a public meeting. The public and press can still hear and see the meeting, but there will be no public question times at the Scrutiny Panel meeting. However, hopefully when all the buildings are back open, we will be able to continue with some sort of public consultation sessions as we did previously, but that is yet to be confirmed. Should any voting be required during this meeting, this will be described at the time. The exceptions to this are the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting and for any other procedural item. For those items, the chair will move the item and then it will be presumed agreed unless there is dissenting comment from any of the committee members. When asked to speak, please turn your camera on, unmute yourself and pause for 3 seconds to allow a slight time delay in the connection. Before I invite members of the scrutiny panel to confirm their attendance, I ask that they please ensure that their mobile phones are switched off or are on silent, their backgrounds are blurred or set to a nondescript background, and they are aware of their surroundings so that they are not disturbed during the meeting. This includes making sure all TVs, radio, smart speakers, etc. are switched off. Now, can I ask the lead officers supporting the panel to introduce themselves, giving their names and job title? Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Clem Smith and I'm the Head of Economy and Planning for Crawley Borough Council.
Good evening, my name is Louise Skipton-Carter and I'm the Sustainability Manager.
In respect of the agenda, items 1 to 3, we will be taking these item agendas together. So I will ask the Democratic Services Officer to introduce them. Oh, they've introduced themselves already. And then we will move on to any apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Just to
Heather, your mic.
Thank you. There had to be the first. Thank you very much. Just to confirm, there's been no apologies for absence. So moving on, as the chair said, we will be taking agenda items 1 to 3. So please can I ask the scrutiny panel members, when called upon, to confirm their name and the wards they represent, if they have any disclosures of interest to make, if they have any whipping declarations, and if they agree with the minutes of the meeting of the Climate Change Scrutiny Panel held on the 27th of February 2020. And if we can start with Councillor Fiveash, please. So if you can please actually, Councillor Fiveash's camera actually he's disappeared from the meeting. He was here, so we need to try and get him back online. So we will move on to Councillor Gilly Hart, please.
Yeah, good evening, Councillor Gilly Hart, Councillor for Ifield and Ifield West. I have no whipping declarations. I have no declarations of interest. I can't approve the minutes because I wasn't available for the meeting.
Okay. Councillor Jaggard.
Yes, I'm Councillor Jaggard from Maidenbough. I'm chairing the meeting tonight. I have no disclosures of interest or whipping declarations, and I approve the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Lunnan.
Good evening. My name is Tim Lunnan. I'm the councillor for Broadfield. I have no whipping declarations. I have no declarations of interest, and I can approve the minutes of the last meeting.
And Councillor Pennington.
Good evening, Councillor Alison Pendlington at Pound Hill, South and Worth.
I have no disclosures of interest, no whipping declarations, and I'm happy to approve the minutes of the last meeting. And also, just for public record, we also have Councillor Jahans, Councillor Mullins and Councillor Peter Smith in the meeting tonight.
So if the panel has agreed all the minutes of the last climate change scrutiny panel held on the 27th of February 2020, and they are an accurate recording of the meeting. So we can now go on to item 4, which is the witness sessions. We've invited various guests tonight to assist the panel in their views on the blue and green infrastructure. This topic includes parks, open spaces, playing fields, woodlands, trees, allotments, together with streams, lakes and other water bodies. And to assist the panel, I would like to welcome tonight Elizabeth Brigden, who is the Planning Policy Manager, Richard Mosingi, Planning Officer, Kate Wilson, Community Services Manager, Karen Ram, the Neighbourhood Services Manager, and we've got Councillor Jahans, who's the Cabinet Member for Environmental Services and Sustainability, and also Councillor Mullins, Cabinet Member for Wellbeing. So we have a short introduction and presentation from you, and then we're going to discuss the progresses and crossover of thoughts. If we can commence with Richard Mosingi and Elizabeth Brigden on the establishment of green infrastructure within the town. Thank you.
Hi there. Hi there, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for the invite to speak and your interest in climate change. My name is Richard and I am part of the strategic planning team within Crawley who are working on updating local planning policy as part of the Crawley Borough's local plan to guide development for the next 15 years. A key element of national planning policy is in implementing climate mitigation measures to protect the environment from man-made pollutants and to enhance nature's prosperity. In the National Planning Policy Framework, this is worded as conservation and enhancement of the natural, built and historic environment. This is a balancing act across local authorities, and although each development application alters the built environment, policy helps to guide which developments are important, necessary and beneficial to each local area. Recent national legislation such as the Environment Bill, which is currently moving through Parliament and due in late 2020, requires development to both conserve and enhance the natural environment to a higher level than before. This is envisioned through a biodiversity metric 2.0 created by Natural England and DEFRA. While the development of the metric is ongoing, its aim is in implementing a quantitative method of measuring biodiversity to ensure that nature has a unit value, enabling protections and improvements to be considered from the onset of development. The National Planning Policy Framework, updated from its 2012 version, released in 2019, and planning practice guidance documents remain key important guidance for local planners in enacting legislation set by central government, which is constantly adapting and changing. The local plan review must be prepared in accordance with national legislation, policy and guidance. The local plan review must also be justified by proportionate technical evidence. The next few slides focus on Crawley's local policy. The adopted local plan released in 2015 has a focus on resolving climate change from the perspective of protecting certain areas from development. This involves guiding developers away from building on biodiversity hotspots such as parks and gardens, local wildlife sites, and in mitigating development on open spaces where justification is not given. It encourages tree planting in accordance with policy CH6 for 1 tree per new dwelling and enforces a high replacement standard for trees lost to development, taking into consideration their girth and time to mature. Initially, tree planting is expected on-site. However, off-site contributions can be agreed with the council. The adopted Green Infrastructure Supplementary Planning document supports the current local plan through providing greater detail on specific policies related to the functions of green infrastructure. It also includes a visual understanding of where green infrastructure within Crawley is located, as well as their typology classifications. Crawley's current Green Infrastructure Supplementary Planning document was adopted in 2016 and will be revised after the Emergent Local Plan is adopted. The Emergent Local Plan has a stronger focus on encouraging and facilitating biodiversity net gain. In relation to this current period of climate change, effort is being made to ensure policies within the Emergent Local Plan have the ability to encourage healthy, sustainable lifestyles throughout the natural, built and historic environment. Through a biodiversity lens, policies mentioned here aim on ensuring green infrastructure is well connected as a network within the borough. There is an increased effort to continue the prioritization of protected biodiversity sites and an emergent focus on securing net gain on new development sites. In this emergent plan, focus is building on trees and types of soft landscaping that are capable of leading towards a net gain in biodiversity. Appropriate species of trees or types of soft landscaping that are suitable to be planted revolve around questions on the natural assets themselves. Whether a tree or type of soft landscape is of a native species and how it affects air quality, pollination, flood alleviation, and its benefits to climate change, adaptation/mitigation. As part of the evidence to support the Emergent Local Plan, 3 studies relating to open space are currently in their final stages of preparation. The Indoor Built Facility Strategy, the Playing Pit Strategy, and the Open Space Sport and Recreation Assessment. The Indoor Built Facility Strategy recommends continuing dialogue between the council and partners who run and maintain physical sporting venues and considerations for securing monies for development/improvement priorities. The Emerging Draft Open Space Sport and Recreation Assessment indicates that there may be a potential deficit in most open space typologies in the future as a result of future population growth. Policies have been adapted slightly to ensure compensation or relocation is provided when open spaces are lost and to direct improvements and enhancements to maximise capacity of the borough's existing open spaces and increase opportunities to introduce multifunctionality benefits with them. This assessment has included policy research to encourage sustainable food growing that may be an asset in future community food growing initiatives. Working similar to allotments, food growing areas can be envisioned on rooftop gardens, community spaces, and on balconies. Using the recommendations from the open space studies and policies, it may be possible to secure conditions which can lead to small improvements in creating longer lasting open spaces that provide multiple benefits to Crawley's residents and users and to nature itself. The EcoServe report summarises in a visual format open spaces within Crawley on their basis to support several functions. In the long term, this can help in monitoring adaptation to climate change. For example, the highest capacity scores for access in nature is around the edge of the borough. This means in areas where capacity is lower, access in nature may be a car or public transport, such as when moving from closer to the town centre. However, through improving sustainable transport and green infrastructure between, around and on buildings, people can be encouraged to go for longer walks, cycle or jog to their destination. Contributions over time towards biodiversity net gain can be visualised by air purification and carbon storage maps, where the amount of trees and soft landscaping to increase and fertile vegetation and soil of good quality to be used, the capacity scores are likely to increase. This would suggest a better estimation on how adaptive environments are to mitigating climate change, as this EcoServe report focuses more on the ability for the environment to manage air pollutants rather than reducing carbon emissions through other mechanisms. It will most probably become clearer over the next 5 years once the Emergent Local Plan is adopted, as a repeat of the EcoServe report in the future provides the ability to compare and contrast past trends. As for the next steps, preparation for the climate change topic paper has already begun and includes much of the previously mentioned material. The emerging local plan will be subject to scrutiny through its independent examination ahead of its adoption. Following adoption, the review of the Green Infrastructure Supplementary Plan document will begin to incorporate the changes in the local plan policies and to include new national policies such as the 2019 National Planning Policy Framework and Environment Bill. This is planned to help provide greater detail in actively monitoring the implementation of net gain policy. However, as it does take a while for a tree and nature to grow, these next steps will take time to be processed and monitored, and this will involve working with departments across the council to implement net gain. Thank you for listening, and are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Really interesting presentation, and we're going to be having a discussion now. So each committee member will have the opportunity to speak. If you would like to please turn your camera on to indicate that you wish to speak, and then turn your microphone on. Before you making sure that you wait and pause for 3 seconds for the time delay, so that we can actually hear what you're saying. Once you have spoken, please turn your camera off and mute your microphone. Once all members have asked questions, committee officers will be able to respond to any queries that you have. So at this point, if you'd like to turn your cameras on, if you would like to ask a question, thank you.
We'll start with Councillor Lunnan.
Hello, thank you. I mean, overall, I'd say it's an excellent presentation and really captures a lot of the excellent work that's already going on to try and reduce the effects of climate change. I did just have a few smaller questions, which hopefully you can either answer quite easily or come back to me at a later date. Two of them are around trees. One of them is, we say that if they can't do directly on site, they can make contributions off site. Now, is that off site still in the borough? And either way, who decides where they go at that point? Do we get to sort of say, well, actually, we'd like some more paid for, say, in Memorial Gardens, or do they just say we're going to put some in Hawthwoods and we just have to accept that? The next question is around trees. We talked about, or sorry, you talked about sort of making sure they're the right suitableness in many ways. Does that include the nativeness of the trees? So do we specifically pick, say, trees that are typically originating in Britain, or do we go for trees just based on whatever we need that meets the other goals? And then thirdly, playing pitches. There was a list of all different types of playing pitches, but what wasn't included there was athletics or running tracks, and I do have a particular interest in those, so I'd be interested to know how those are caught. I'm not saying we've got a deficit of athletics tracks, one is probably enough, but it is probably, in my mind, quite important that the provision of that is captured in the local plan. And those are my questions.
Elizabeth, please. You're still muted. Microphone.
I always do that. Apologies. Yes, hi, sorry. I am Elizabeth Brigden. I'm Planning Policy Manager. In response to particularly the two questions in relation to trees, so in terms of the contribution, the financial contribution comes to the council, and we can determine how that's spent and where, and that's done either through the process of development control when considering the spending of Section 106 contributions, or otherwise it's done through a wider strategy should the council wish to have something like that set up. So from that point of view, the developer doesn't make that decision as to where those trees are planted. That is for the council to decide and to determine. In terms of the species, yes, we do have lines within our supplementary planning document, and we have a list of tree species. And in the new policy emerging, we also specify UK trees as a preference. Obviously, moving towards climate change, there may well be a need to have maybe some more drought-resistant trees potentially in some areas, and obviously that may be that they are not necessarily native, but on the whole, we would prefer certainly UK native trees for the purposes of biodiversity. In terms of the athletics tracks, I think Richard may be better placed to respond to that query, if that's okay. So I'll hand over to Richard.
Hi. In terms of the athletics track, as well as the open space sport and recreation assessment, which deals with the different typologies of open space, the playing pit strategy deals with football, rugby, etc., but essentially pitches outside where sports are engaged in. And the third study, which is the first time we're commissioning it, is an indoor built facility strategy. So that has looked at swimming pools and sports halls, and it's looked at K2 Leisure Centre. So within that report, it talks about athletics and it talks about cycling, etc.
Are there any more committee members who would like to ask a question?
We have Councillor Julie Hart.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'd like to follow on from Councillor Tim Lunnan. It was a very good presentation. There's an awful lot of work and a lot of information in it. My question again is on the trees. Having said that you're hoping to plant local species, would they be following on with the species that are already on site, or would you be introducing a variety of trees to any given area?
Bear with me, Elizabeth. It's whirring away. There you go. You're live.
Thank you. It would be very much determined site by site, and obviously if it's a development and the trees are being planted on site, then the development control officer will be considering the species as part of the planning application and or as a condition afterwards. But that's certainly something that would be considered in the mix as to what's appropriate and what's not. If it were a contribution coming to the council, then again it would be for us to determine in terms of the management and the maintenance of that area and what would be appropriate for the site that was having the trees being planted on it. But it would be very much a matter to be considered on a site-by-site basis.
Thank you.
Right. Next we have Councillor Penlington.
Thank you for your presentation and for being here tonight to talk to us. I appreciate this is probably fairly early to be asking this question, but I'm just thinking clearly it's a lot of great plans, it's a lot of things that needs to happen, but we do find ourselves financially now in some very, very uncertain times. I'm just wondering what kind of planning is going on with a view to making sure this work continues, despite the fact that clearly budgets are going to be tightened a lot over the next period.
In terms of the progress with the local plan, that is a ring-fenced budget that we received. The plan itself is being prepared under through a grant that was received in the past that we've been able to maintain through the progress of the preparation of the local plan and its review. In terms of understanding the viability of development, that is something that we are considering as part of the local plan process and the preparation of, so to ensure that development is still able to meet the requirements that we are expecting it to meet through the plan policies. But certainly, subject to that, the contributions that would come in through the development coming forward and the development industry, that obviously will provide the council with some form of financial resource to put towards the green infrastructure improvements.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from committee members? No, I have a couple of. I can't see that. Declaration of interest. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you. I understand that Councillor Fiveash has now joined us. Can I please check, could you please introduce yourself and confirm whether you have or not have any declarations of interest, and whether you approve the minutes of the last meeting, please, Councillor Fiveash.
Hi there, sorry for late arrival, I had some issues connecting. Yeah, I have got no declarations or whipping interests, and agree the minutes of the last meeting.
Thank you. Sorry, I hadn't noticed that you'd joined us. I've got a couple of questions, and I'm not sure who's best to answer those. It's about, you know, we've talked about that the local plan aims to deliver a net gain of biodiversity, etc. And I wondered whether that had been achieved over the last few years. That was what was required in the last local plan, and how is it judged? So that's the first thing. The other thing, I'm really pleased that the green infrastructure is getting its own SPD, which I think, you know, which I think is brilliant. I just wondered what the balance is between protecting and planning. It's some of the sites on the topology open space topology map looked like to be down near Worth Church in a conservation area, which I know is very good for biodiversity. It's also on a floodplain, yet it is also on the local plan as an H2 possible development site. And I'm just wondering what the balance is there and what gets priority, whether the climate, biodiversity, the environment gets priority, or whether the planning and the demand for housing gets priority. And similarly, we haven't mentioned the flooding and things. And again, where is the balance between potential flooding? Again, at a recent planning meeting last night, there was the balance between building on a floodplain and the potential for development. And I wondered what protection the local plan was going to be given for floodplains, for biodiversity, balancing out the H2 demand for development and in the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Wow, yes, that is absolutely the crux of the matter for planning. I completely agree. In terms of your first question and the net gain and whether or not it's been achieved through the last plan, this is a relatively new requirement that's come through national planning policy. So whilst our adopted plan, the 2015 plan, does specify that there is a desire to work towards net gain rather than halting, rather than, you know, having no net loss or just, you know, maintaining. We did actually have an aspiration in the plan itself for net gain in biodiversity, but at that stage it wasn't possible for us to push it any further. However, nationally that's caught up and overtaken us. So with the Environment Bill and the changes to the National Planning Policy framework, we are actually able to not just expect a net gain, but we are able to insist on it. So actually nationally, that is an expectation that we require all development to secure net gain. In terms of how it's judged and how it's implemented, that is the really tricky bit actually, and that's the bit that's going to need the work, because it absolutely needs it needs the experts, it needs the ecologists to be able to explain actually what constitutes net gain when you're taking into account any particular loss of biodiversity. So obviously if you have a site that has absolutely no nature conservation value, a 10% net gain on that would not necessarily mean very much particularly, but when you're starting to add in what's there already, it gets quite complicated, and that's what Richard in his presentation was referring to when he was talking about the metric that DEFRA and Natural England are preparing. So hopefully we will have a nationally consistent approach. In terms of the balance between the absolutely critical requirement for housing that we know as a borough we have, let alone as a country, and the priority on building houses, balanced against green infrastructure and particularly planning on building on floodplains. The housing site that you referred to in Worth, that was a site that as a council we very strongly objected to through the local plan previously, but the planning inspector determined that on balance he felt there could possibly be a win-win situation whereby the remaining nature conservation area, part of that site that isn't built on, is improved as part of the development benefits. So that's why that site has subsequently been allocated. So that's the situation that we are in, and we have a very detailed policy that tries to pick up some of the really important aspects of that particular site when and if a development planning application comes in for that site. In terms of generally speaking, biodiversity and flood issues would be taken into account as part of the planning application. We do have policies in the plan that will make sure that they are taken into account, and development would be refused if they can't be satisfied. So particularly if the technical engineers cannot agree that flooding could be mitigated against, then a development would be refused. But obviously there are a variety of ways that such things could be considered to be acceptable, and obviously that's then for a site-by-site basis and consideration. That helps.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. When you were speaking, something else popped into my mind, which was going back to Councillor London's comment about the trees. And obviously funding is 106 funding is available for planting trees. Is any of that money ever put aside or kept for maintaining those trees once they're in place? And particularly on developments when there are there is amenity land put aside with trees, you know, a few years down the line, is that money there to protect those and maintain those trees, or how does that work? And is that in the local plan or something completely separate?
Yeah, there is an expectation that when contributions are provided for the planting of a tree, there's also the provision for its maintenance. So if a site were to plant the development site were to plant the tree on the site, then there is an expectation that those trees will be maintained for a period of time. And if the contribution comes to us financially, we would expect financial contribution to support the maintenance of that tree over the same period of time. So that is something, and that's something that's set out in the Section 106 agreement. So when the contributions come in, the council will consider how much it's got to spend on the planting and how much goes into its maintenance. And it would have to be spent in accordance with that.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else, any other councillors who would like to comment, come back in with anything?
Hello, I wouldn't mind saying something at this stage if I could, Kim.
Yep, that's fine.
Is that okay? I was very interested because a lot of this is to do with my portfolio as the Wellbeing Cabinet member, and it's really interesting to see, although none of what we do in the portfolio is a statutory requirement, it's interesting to see that how vital it's become and how committed that we have to be now as a council to these areas in our community, and how important it is really to the biodiversity. So I'm sort of pleased with the way the discussion's gone so far, because it is taking us forward in full commitment to do these things. What I concern myself with right now is the financial straits we're likely to be in as a council, and how some of these things are going to be paid for. And I do understand the business contributions, the 106 or SIL or whatever, but we still need to be very conscious about the vital importance to our community of this biodiversity environment that we need to create. When Richard was speaking, he heartened me up when he started talking about sustainable food growing and its complement to allotments, or the comment he made about allotments, and that's, to me, has been one of the driving factors. And actually, out of this virus that's going around, many more people are now interested in getting allotments and growing their own vegetables. There is a great surge in demand starting to happen across the nation about allotments. So when Richard was talking about sustainable food growing, I wondered if he could expand on that a little bit. Obviously, we can make sure in all of our developments, and perhaps in the areas where they're missing, to make allotment provision, because I think there's a great case now to be made for these. But I don't know what he meant exactly by sustainable food growing, beside the allotments. If he was talking about farms, or if he was talking about growing in, I don't know, window boxes or whatever. So I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit.
Hi there, thank you. So the way that the information on community food growing is entered into the open space study, which is in draft format at the minute, was a company called Sustain, who do some policy research, and they've done research into community food growing. So in terms of what they're considering, is sort of looking at spaces within the borough, which could possibly be amenity space, at the minute, which could possibly be sort of, if you have a block of flats and there's a lot of grass areas surrounding it at the back, there could be community food growing there. In terms of that's looking at the ground. Obviously, it is encouraging garden spaces to be used, but that is also private land, so it does depend on sort of the meaning of community from that perspective. But it is also worth considering some of the newer innovations when it comes to growing on top of bus stops or on top of balconies or also rooftop gardens if a roof is accessible and safe to do so. So it does take into account the current sort of developments or layout of land and the way people currently live and sort of what resources and spaces available to them to begin growing.
Could I come back in there, Kim? Yeah, thank you.
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you. I mean, that sounds exciting, actually, really exciting, and I'm quite pleased to hear you talking about this. I don't know the company you referred to, Sustainable Food Company, but I mean, I think that I would love to see a report on what is achievable in Crawley, how we could achieve it, and what spaces we're looking at, because so many of our spaces now, people are trying to grab them to extend their houses so they can build another house on it, and all sorts of things are going on. And I think there should be something to stop that and saying, well, no, we need that land, but for creating food and you know, for the environment. How you turn that around, I don't know, but I would be very interested to find out. It's a big piece of work, I think, but a piece of work that's really worthwhile. So first of all, I thank you for putting it on the agenda tonight and reporting on it. But secondly, I think I'd love to see the follow up on it and how we're going to go there, how we're going to achieve it, and what it means in our 14 or is it 15 now? I always forget, neighbourhoods, where we can actually see where these plots are and what the possibilities are.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris, and garden spaces, trees, amenity spaces is so important for mental well-being as well, mental health, mental well-being, and it really pains me when hedges are cut down and just a horrible fence is put there instead, when you had a lovely, you know, green lush hedge cooling the air, insects, animals in there, and you know, off it goes, and a fence is put up. It's very difficult, and that's part of the part of the planning is that on developments, as I understand it, you can't always protect the amenity space that is on the initial plan a few years down the line, and it disappears. So are there any other questions from any councillors? Any other comments anybody wishes to make? No? Lovely. Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Richard. Really enjoyable, interesting comment, slides and things. So thank you very much for coming tonight, and we will help shape our recommendations when we come to that part. And if we're happy to move on, we'll go on to the neighbourhood services with Kate Wilson and Karen Ram. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So to introduce myself, my name is Kate Wilson. I'm the Head of Community Services, and Neighbourhood Services falls within my service area division. And I'm also joined by Karen Ram, who's the Neighbourhood Services Manager, who I'm sure can contribute as needed. So I'm just going to take you through a brief presentation. So I shall share that in a moment, and then I'll hand back to you, Chair, for questions that you and the panel may have. So hopefully that's showing now. Is that showing for everybody okay? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So I think first of all, just to say again, to echo your thoughts, Chair, thank you to Richard and Elizabeth, because actually I think what they've taken you through tonight actually sets the really important strategic context for the work that we do within neighbourhood services. And actually setting that strategic direction through the forward plan gives us a good sense of where we need to get to for the borough to make sure that we are providing all of the different needs within our green infrastructure. So when we were asked to contribute to this brief, in which we're delighted to do, I think obviously the first thing that we recognise, but it's quite a challenging brief at the moment, and it crosses a number of divisions within the council as well. And I think probably the most important thing to clarify at the front end is that neighbourhood services very much maintains the green infrastructure that we have. So whether that be cutting grass, maintaining, wildflowers or hedges, or shrub beds and maintaining trees. But in terms of the blue infrastructure, which is to do with the waterways and flooding, typically that work is actually dealing more with the implications of climate change, and subsequently they are highly involved in the planning process and making sure that, you know, to your point, Councillor Jaggard, that the land that is identified for housing development and other uses actually is appropriate because of the flooding risk, and that's mitigated effectively. So I think we've also got to be mindful that the green infrastructure that we have is at a scale which means that realistically there's only a marginal impact that can be gained within this space, and hopefully what I go on to explain will help to make that clearer. But also we've already heard from people that actually our green spaces have you know, multiple demands on them. There's a real conflict of uses often. So actually it's about really trying to understand where there's alignment and actually where there is conflict, which ultimately is going to be the best solution for the most people or for the issue that's at hand, which is never an easy thing to establish and come to agreement on. But also, I think it's about recognising that often we are, as a division, responding to human behaviours and other policy decisions that we don't actually have control over. So it's about how can we influence those wider issues that are potentially outside of the council. So again, I'll go on to explore that in a moment. So just to talk through blue infrastructure, so this is typically done within Nigel Sheehan's division. So very briefly, our roles and responsibilities are very much around watercourse management, and obviously on the slide deck there you'll see a number of examples of those watercourses, and importantly, as we've already mentioned, about planning application assessment as well in terms of suitability. We also have a flood prevention programme, which is planned capital works, but also we have to be able to respond reactively as well, because, you know, we don't always know what issues are coming our way, so we need to be able to respond and react accordingly. So there is a revenue programme that props that work up. So Richard has already given a really detailed presentation around our green infrastructure. So just to sort of simplify it and to pull out some of the headlines within that, effectively our total green infrastructure is that we've got just short of 2,000 hectares of the available 4,500, which is 43%. So I was actually, you know, pleasantly surprised by that. And, you know, I think as somebody that's known and worked in Crawley for a long time now, I think it is clear that there is a lot of green space within the borough. And you'll see on the slide as well that you'll see there's three sort of fairly broad uses of that space as well, which is around, you know, open space, sport and recreation, designated sites and reserves, and also habitat spaces as well. So actually there's a slight difference in those, and again that's what we will need to be deciding ultimately, is whether that balance is right. I think the other thing to mention as well, it's always pretty difficult to sort of calculate and determine, you know, impact in each of these aspects, but I think all of the areas will offer different contributions in terms of, you know, carbon sequestration and storage. We've already heard from Richard around air quality, water management, urban cooling, habitat and wildlife, and again, you can bundle that information together into one figure, but actually different types of use of space will obviously provide you a different return in each of those areas. So we have a lot of trees. We estimate around 250,000 trees in Crawley and 4,500 shrub beds, which take, you know, significant time and effort to maintain. In terms of the trees, we're going through a process at the moment of cataloguing and actually checking a lot of those trees so that we can have a much more sort of systematic process to that. And again, with the shrub beds team, we've actually had a dedicated team working on that, albeit we're keen to sort of bring that into our business as usual. But again, we shouldn't underestimate actually how much resource and effort maintaining that stock takes. And we are an urban town. And I think another point to make really is that people love trees, typically as long as they're not too close to their property. So we're always having to balance that, and particularly where we are, you know, short of land effectively, and there are a lot of demands for it. We just need to be mindful of that, and sometimes the intentions are incredibly positive, but actually it does come then with implications for us. So talking about that impact, so a best estimate which has come from the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, you'll see on the slide there, is that the green infrastructure removes between 1 and 1.5% of overall carbon emissions. But I think, again, just to point back to my previous slide, that there are other factors in terms of the positive things that our green space can bring around the air quality, water management, habitat and wildlife, etc. So whilst it's an important measure, it's not the only one that we should be considering. So again, we need to have a think about some of those conflicts. What do we want for our green spaces? And again, I think the work that we're going through for the local plan with those specific strategies actually will start to tease out, you know, some of those things, because as Councillor Mullins rightly said, you know, the importance of green space and open space and our green infrastructure for health and well-being of the town is significant. But actually how we balance that is why we're here. But I think we need to be really clear that any changes that we make is likely to be marginal in terms of removing emissions. So it's about managing expectations in that sense. So what are the opportunities open to us? So we're aware that government's consulting on accelerating tree planting. You know, there's the issue around costs and conflict. I've already sort of gone into some detail about that. Colleagues have also alluded to the fact that where land, you know, where the strategies suggest planting, where land use conflicts don't exist, but they would have to be outside of Crawley potentially, and actually how comfortable that is. We also know that there's a bit of a vocal lobby at the moment around wilding of grass verges, but again, you'll have equal, if not more, people within the community that actually like a nice short uniform grass verge. So again, and I would say that's probably where a lot of our complaints and requests for service come from, is around the grass is too long. So whilst we absolutely acknowledge the lobby and the voice for the wilding of grass verges, there will be a contra argument for that as well. But if you go wild, the wilder the better, I think is probably the message here. So should more of our managed grass spaces follow suit? So I think that's a really important question for the panel to consider. So whilst I don't want this to completely obviously skew the purpose and the scope of the panel, I think it's really useful for us just to get a sense of actually what does neighbourhood services day-to-day work look like in trying to manage our green infrastructure. So that there's some, you know, some headlines there about the amount of litter that we pick, the number of bins that we empty, how much fly tipping we remove, and of course there's always the dog bins as well. But I think this points us back to actually we're just dealing with the behaviours of people and other, you know, policy decisions outside of our control, which are, you know, packaging norms for sort of consumers and the suppliers and manufacturers of those goods. So we literally pick those up, but we're not actually directly influencing at the moment what their policies look like. And it's really difficult for us to quantify the impact on that climate change agenda as well. So the work that we can do across the council, and obviously this goes across into our enforcement teams as well. So we can use communications, we can try and educate people, and we also use enforcement such as fixed penalty notices as well for littering. But there's only so far that can go. So again, I think we need to be realistic that for a real effective change, we potentially need to you know, consider trying to influence outside of the control of the council. And of course, a wonderful thing to finish off on really again is that just that public perception of if you keep the grass long, you then have struggles collecting your dog mess. So actually, which of those is going to be seen as the preference? So hopefully the information that I've given you and the thoughts that I've given you this evening can sort of inspire some further questions. But if I can hand back to you now, Chair, I'd be pleased to take any questions that anybody may have.
Thank you. That's really, really interesting. Loads of things I've been jotting down. If any councillors would like to ask a question, please put your camera on the same as we did last time. Thank you.
We've got Councillor Julie Hart.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to say again, thank you very much for detailed, interesting report. And I'd also like to say thank you very, very much on behalf of iField and personally for all the work that Kate and Karen have been doing throughout the lockdown. I think they've done a brilliant job. They've done what was necessary when it was necessary, and kept everything going. Although I must have one simple admission. It was lovely to smell fresh cut grass last week after so long. But thank you to both their teams.
Thank you. Is there any other councillor who would like to ask a question?
Councillor Lunnan.
Hello, yeah, I'd echo Julie's comments, although when I was being traced by a tractor with 3 grass cutting blades on the back of it through Goffs Park, I perhaps wasn't so pleased about it today. My questions just very quickly relate to green infrastructure. On the presentation, there was a stat sort of how they broke down to 3 areas. And just a quick couple of questions. Does that include private gardens? And also, where do things like central reservations fit into that? Because actually quite a lot of our central reservations, especially on our main roads, have got trees and grass and stuff on them, which really do add to the image of Crawley being a green town. You know, when people first arrive, they're driving along tree-lined roads, on, you know, both in the middle and on the sides. I think it gives a very good impression of the town. But I'm just wondering whether that's captured somewhere specifically.
Kate, over to you.
Hi there, thank you, Councillor Lunnan, for your questions. In terms of the private gardens, I must say I will need to come back to you on that one. I'm not sure, or whether another colleague can answer that for me. As far as the central reservations go, yes, that is very much part of the work of the neighbourhood services team. What I perhaps could have mentioned earlier is that we also cut the grass on behalf of West Sussex County Council. We have an agreed arrangement with them each year. So those high-speed roads and those roads where there are the central reservations, they also fall within our area of responsibility. And particularly through COVID-19 lockdown, we've always made sure that where they were growing so long that it affected sight lines and therefore safety, they were always a priority for us. So yes, that is factored into that data.
Any other councillors wishing to speak?
Councillor Mullins, did you want to be brought in? You did have your camera on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I did, yes. Is that okay? I don't know if it's come on, is it?
It has now.
All right, okay, lovely. I was just listening and getting a little bit excited about the long grass, really, because the general consensus of people is that they don't want long grass on verges, and I can absolutely understand when it's on highways and there's safety elements about vision, and you have to look across roundabouts and you have to be fairly safe. But what amazed me this time with the lack of grass cutting we went through was all the gorgeous wild flowers that suddenly appeared from out the grass itself, and including the seeding of the grass. You could actually see for the first time seed pods on the grass, and there was wonderful poppies, yellow buttercups and blue flowers, and I mean some of the grass verges I looked at them in amazement. I thought, well, if that's really nature, what are we stopping it doing it for? It was so nice. And I think there's such a big case to be made for some areas where there's no safety involved. I need to add that, I'm afraid. But where that couldn't be the case, that some of these grass verges could be allowed to grow and do what nature does. I mean, we've actually got a wild verge outside our house, which we, I know it's county land, but we sort of created it ourselves by putting more seeds in, and all sorts of things are growing on it now. But it's such, nature is such a wonderful environment to look at and to love. And why does everybody want everything to be cropped? You know, back in the 60s, we used to grow our hair really long, and our parents got mad with us because they wanted us to have short back and sides, but we wouldn't do it. So that's the difference, really. I think it's a perception, and people have got used to that sort of need. And I think there's so much more to offer from the beauty of nature that we ought to be looking at where we can achieve that in all of this. So thank you for the report. I think it's very useful, and let's hope we can go forward with open minds on it all. What I'm pleased about tonight is how we've elevated the importance of so much of my portfolio to new heights, which is going to give me a lot of strong arguments when it comes to arguing about budgets.
Kate, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you very much, Heather. Yes, thank you, Councillor Mullins, for those points. I think a couple of things just to raise there. So this past year, we've actually, you know, been looking to bring forward some additional sites. So we've actually engaged with members just to identify potential wildflower planting sites, and where it's been practical to do so, albeit obviously COVID-19 did impact that a little. I think as well, just to be clear that to get that really beautiful look and array of wonderful wildflowers, as I think we would all love to see, that does actually take quite a lot of investment. It takes a lot of seed, and also it needs to be done every year as well. So we just need to factor that in as well, because it doesn't come with a sort of a cost neutral position. That there is also investment required as well. But certainly we have started to identify sites where we can start to test this theory and how well they go down.
Okay. Next we have Councillor Julie Hart.
Thank you. Going on from the last question from Councillor Mullins, and Kate, you said about identifying sites and areas for wildflower planting, which we had a meeting earlier on in the year, and we had identified some sites. Have you any ideas and any thoughts with the team as to when they will be implemented, notwithstanding the fact that I know everything's been in lockdown for 3 months? And have you any ideas also regarding the parade at Ifield, which was, I believe, was 5 days of completion, never mind starting, when we all went into lockdown?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hart, for your questions. So yes, just to acknowledge that obviously the team are working very hard to recover and get back on track with some of the programmes. Obviously, in terms of the planting, we have to hit certain optimum times of the year. So we just need to make sure, but I think what we probably can do is communicate to members actually when that programme will start again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in terms with the work on the parade, again, I'll get an update for you about when that work will start.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I pressed it twice by mistake and then couldn't speak. Yeah, I agree with so much that Chris Mullins said about the beauty and the really lovely grass verges that we've had with all the plants and flowers and bees and insects and things. And I'm under a lot of pressure from a lot of my residents to not to have cut the grass. It was really tricky. I assume you have seen the website that's called Plant Life, which promotes and gives management and lots of advice on how to set up the wildflower verges, and I'm assuming that you have done that because that is a really interesting website. It advocates 1 or 2 cuts a year, and I would just like to ask how was it cutting the grass after such a long period of having it long? Was it causing a great deal of difficulty, and do you think that in the future even just reducing the cuts would be an option? That's the first thing. The second thing is about you talked about the bins and how many bins you collect empty and things, and I wondered, most of our rubbish bins that are around the town and things are just basically rubbish bins, and I wondered what whether there's any advantage in having bins specifically put aside for recycle plastic bottles and things like that, as opposed to rubbish, and having a recycling collection as well as a normal refuse just on bin collection for the parks and things.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jaggard. I'll work through those if I may. So in terms of the website that you talk about, yes, very much so. Karen and team very much rely on that, and it obviously does advocate sustainable planting. In terms of the reducing cuts, is it an option, and how has it gone? So what we've needed to do is be very systematic in our approach to grass cutting this first time out. I would say that the progress we've made has been really impressive. So I think it's something like 26 working days to actually do that first cut. So of course, I think we've always caveated that with it won't perhaps be as pretty if in the same way that as we're trying to catch up, but certainly in terms of trying to get that length down, I think that's been very successful. But the length of the grass has taken its toll on some of our machinery, so we've perhaps seen a little bit more impact in the repairs team in the depot have probably seen us a bit more than they would have liked to. But I think the really important thing was that we wanted to do it properly. We wanted to do it well. We wanted to leave the environment as neat and tidy as we possibly could, because we know that it's important for some people, equally balancing those that would have preferred to see it wild. But reducing cuts, yes, it is always an option, and and again, that is something that we can look at moving forward. So you also asked about recycling bins in our open spaces and town centres. So what we're finding is that they're not a good solution per se, because what typically happens is that they just get contaminated with general rubbish as well. But in specific locations, and we've trialled some in Tilgate Park and on one of the parades as well, but where it's in a location that's carefully planned, actually there can be some success around that. So I think I'll certainly get some information from Karen and the team around how successful those initial trials have been and whether we can roll that out elsewhere. But yeah, we just have to tread a little bit carefully.
Thank you. That was yeah, really helpful. The other thing I was going to ask is you at the moment, and we've got so much fly tipping and rubbish being left on our parks. What can we do? How can we change people's behaviour? Have you got any ideas on that? I mean, is new signage? I've seen things that signs that have like faces on with big eyes watching people, whether those help, or there's some quite rude signs coming out I've seen on the internet. What are we trying to do to encourage people, to change people's behaviour, how to influence people to actually clear up their own rubbish and take it home with them?
Thank you, Councillor. I think you're probably meaning the City of York's current campaign, yes, which is interesting. So Councillor Johns, I was going to have a little conversation with about that actually, because it certainly is impactful. I perhaps wasn't going to say it out loud in this forum, but yeah, absolutely. It is always going to be a blend of education and enforcement, and it's about getting that balance right as well. So I think there's some historic evidence from Keep Britain Tidy campaign that what they're finding is that people that litter will always litter. It doesn't matter what you do, that's the way that they behave. You've then got this small group in the middle who will be influenced by what they see around them. So if there's a pile of rubbish somewhere, they will probably add to that pile of rubbish because they think, oh, well, that's okay. You've equally got the large group and the majority who actually are very responsible, and they will take their litter home. But I think you're right. I think we're seeing now a significant more use of our parks and open spaces and green spaces at the moment. With that comes more littering, and potentially, you know, people are behaving in ways that they might not normally, actually, just because of the nature of what we're facing at the moment. So we do have our community wardens. They are empowered to issue fixed penalty notices for littering. And that is as simple as if somebody drops a cigarette butt on the floor, that actually is littering, and there'll be a fixed penalty notice applied, and we do pursue those. In terms of fly tipping, we will always look for evidence to see if we can find out where it's come from. And we will always then take people through the court system and make sure that, you know, the biggest sanction and fine is applied where possible, and we will always then use that within our publicity. But you're right, I think, you know, we've always got to be looking at more ways for, you know, to find how can we just get those small behaviour changes, but it is incredibly difficult. And oh, sorry, just to say, we also do fixed penalty notices for throwing litter from vehicles as well. That's a fairly recent addition, which again has been quite successful.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. Anybody, any other councillor? Oh, yes.
Yeah. Can I speak? Hello? Am I on? Yeah. Yeah. That was quite enticing to talk about the fly tipping and leaving the rubbish. Fly tipping's one thing, because people who tend to fly tip are people who should be taking their rubbish, that sort of rubbish, to the tip. And I really wish the county council had opened up the tip properly, so that people could get back to taking stuff. Why they had to say, well, it's open, but you can only bring this or bring that, I don't understand that. It's either open or it's closed, and we really need to be canvassing the county to say, look, let's open the tip properly, and let's encourage people to bring their rubbish down to the tips. I mean, if people have got to get rid of an old broken wardrobe, why can't they take it down? I mean, at the moment you can't do it, and I don't understand that. That's a mystery to me. The other thing that I wanted to say on the leaving of rubbish, we've had particular problems since the virus, and we're getting lots of rubbish left around in the parks and everywhere, and it's really quite bad. Now, my mind was cast back then to when we used to in Crawley run really successful campaigns, and we used to run campaigns like Keep Crawley Clean, or a greener, cleaner Crawley was one, where we were, and we actually had T-shirts and baseball caps. And the funny thing was, I was looking for some caps because we were going to play golf the other day, and I came across a baseball cap that said, you know, keep cleaner, cleaner Crawley on it. And it was a green baseball cap, and one of our players wore it. We weren't in Crawley when he was wearing it, but it was quite proud of it. And so we were doing things like that, and we were actually very successful. We ran campaigns against dog mess as well. And we've done these things in the past, but it has been a long time since we've run campaigns like that. And it might be that we need to consider going back to those campaigns, but giving people something to wear, like with the Cleaner Crawley campaign, was really good, a really good thought. And people were going around the town wearing this stuff. It was quite amazing. And I think the town was tidier for all of that. If I go along Cherry Lane now, which I do nearly every day, it's filthy with rubbish, to be honest, on both sides. The whole of Cherry Lane is littered all the way down, up and down. It's just people going through, chucking stuff as they walk through. And it just annoys me intently because it's not necessary. So, I mean, how can we campaign? Have we got a budget to do a decent campaign? Is it possible? Because it pays off in the end, because it costs money to pick rubbish up.
Thanks, Councillor Mullins. Yeah, absolutely take on board your point. And as I say, I'm going to be going to Councillor Johns this week actually with some thoughts around what that campaign might look like. I think as well, just to acknowledge that my point earlier, that whilst we're recognising unprecedented levels of litter, particularly in our parks and open spaces, typically it's people that are out and about in the early morning that are seeing the worst of it. But what's really pleasing is that our patch teams are getting in there. They start work at 7 AM and are obviously clearing those sites in readiness for the majority. So, you know, families and children to come and use them. So we continue to work incredibly hard, but I do appreciate that those early morning, perhaps dog walkers or exercises are seeing increased littering at the moment. But yes, we can look at campaigns.
Thank you. I think we've asked lots and lots of questions, and thank you very much, Kate, for coming along to talk to us. I found it really interesting, and thank you for the contributions from everybody else. Councillor Johans is now going to speak to us. Yeah?
Yes. Just on the last points, you did tempt me to come in on those. Kate, really look forward to hearing about York. Sounds quite interesting. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of quick points. Just one thing to say is that we do have a zero tolerance policy on littering, and I know we have been issuing fixed penalty notices on those, so that is in full swing. And also on the issue of fly tipping, we did introduce a discount to our bulky waste collection services, which was actually quite successful, and you had quite a good uptake of that, which I hope helped to reduce some fly tipping when it could have happened otherwise. So we were quite active on that. And Chris, I look forward to seeing you in a cap and a t-shirt to join our future campaigns on this. But on a serious note, if there are any ideas that members do have, you know my email addresses, and feel free to drop in any ideas, and that goes for anybody watching the scrutiny panel at the moment as well. And that's all I wanted to add, really.
Yeah, Kate would like to come back with an answer for that.
It was just actually Councillor Lunnon's question earlier on about whether private gardens were included in the information that we provided, and it was just to confirm that no, they're not included in that information.
Thank you. Councillor Johans, would you like to update us on any of your portfolio things on climate change and sustainability?
Yes, of course. As the theme of this meeting was on green and blue infrastructure, I've mainly prepared on that, but I'm happy to talk about some other areas later in questions if anybody has them. I mean, last week we passed at Cabinet our involvement in the EV network charging points, and to put out to consultation our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, so could potentially touch on those. But I just wanted to stick onto the theme of green and blue infrastructure as we've been discussing today, partly because I've been doing some research into this area over the weekend and today during my lunch break when I should have been working probably. And I come across some quite interesting stuff. And one of the issues that cropped up, as Kate spoke about earlier, was around maintenance. We've heard a lot about the positives of green and blue infrastructure, and my understanding of it is that it is really an integral part of having a successful and livable place to live. You know, from parks and to rivers and whatnot in our neighbourhoods. They do have an important role to play, other than just for climate mitigation. We've got health and well-being, which I'm sure Chris will go on to speak about. But there's also issues of attracting residents and families into our neighbourhoods and creating a really positive atmosphere and setting for businesses to come and invest in, which I think may become quite an important area for us, considering the financial impact that we're experiencing at the moment because of COVID. And it's also an important package that draws people to our town from surrounding areas. But just on the climate change adaptation and mitigation issue, I found there's some really good evidence actually that green infrastructure can help us with that. And obviously with the climate warming, we know that extreme weather events in particular are probably going to become more severe and more frequent. So I think it is important that the infrastructure we do bring forward is resistant to these kind of changes. I know Elizabeth mentioned right at the beginning about having things like drought resistant trees. So as I was preparing and doing some research on this, I actually came across Maidstone's Blue and Green Infrastructure Strategy document. And they have a really good section in there actually about how this kind of infrastructure can help with mitigating and adapting to climate change. And they've outlined some areas around how it can help with reducing flood risks and creating natural flood storage areas, and also to do with sustainable drainage systems and reducing risks of surface water flooding, and then things like air quality and helping to cool environments and providing shade, and then obviously the carbon storage side of things with trees. So these were all really amazing and positive initiatives, and it all sounded really exciting when I was reading this. But then when I was thinking about them in relation to Crawley and trying to deliver something on that kind of scale in Crawley, reality kind of hit me, and I realized it's quite a different story for us. We're not Maidstone, and we don't have the scale of blue and green infrastructure that they do. As Kate mentioned, we're an urban town. But having said that, our green infrastructure does play an important role, as I mentioned earlier, even though climate mitigation only probably is a marginal aspect of that. As in Kate's slide, it showed it was about 1 to 1.5%. So going back to what I said about maintenance, it's a really essential part to maximize the benefits of green infrastructure. But there is quite a bit of a tension when it comes to this in terms of maintaining our green spaces. Do we cut the hedges and the grass, or do we let vegetation to grow out? Which I know from residents we've received many complaints from, and it has sometimes quite negative perceptions, even though these overgrown spaces may be better for biodiversity. So an area of consideration that I think the panel should really reflect on is how do we really try and reconcile this dynamic between the potential climate benefits of green and blue infrastructure alongside with the financial costs, which we know we're going to be one of the worst impacted areas in the country. Our projections for next year look like we're estimated to be around about a £3.2 million gap. And then you've got also another dynamic between aesthetics and residents' perceptions of what they'd like these spaces to look like compared to the positive impacts for climate mitigation and adaptation. I'd just like to share a dilemma we had, the grass cutting dilemma. We talked about how some people like having it long, some people like having it cut short, fresh. So obviously at the beginning of lockdown, we weren't cutting the grass, and I was receiving some emails from residents saying, oh, please cut the grass. And then kind of a week before we did start cutting the grass, and then the week we did start cutting the grass itself, I started receiving emails from people saying, no, please, this is amazing for biodiversity, please don't cut the grass. And at that point, I realized that there's no pleasing everybody in politics. But it was an interesting thing to think about in terms of what we're discussing today, in terms of climate change and how can green infrastructure help with mitigating it compared to kind of community preferences and what would they like to see happen. And then there's also cost implications mixed up within all of that. I'd also like to throw in one last point, some food for thought, and that's something that Chris mentioned earlier on about how some of the work that is carried out isn't a statutory requirement. I was reading a paper that was commissioned by Imperial College London, and it was titled Integrating Green and Blue Spaces into Our Cities, Making It Happen. How do we make it happen? And they conducted a survey where they asked what some of the most common factors were in preventing greater uptake of blue and green infrastructure solutions. And the one thing that came up most of all was a lack of compulsory standards. And they talked about how there's a lack of enforceable standards for local authorities to have a minimum amount of blue or green infrastructure in new or existing developments. So that may be something to think about, but obviously that's probably above our heads somewhere in government that make those decisions. At that point, happy to take any questions. And also, can I just thank Richard and Elizabeth and Kate for their excellent presentations. I'd actually really like to sit down with everyone at some point and go through it in more detail at some point.
Thank you. Are there any councillors who would like to ask Councillor Johans any questions or any points following that? Anybody? No? Then we go on to Councillor Mullins. Thank you very much, Councillor Johans, for that. It was really, really interesting. And
thank you for having
obviously
me.
I'm obviously shadow you, so it's really interesting from that point of view as well. Councillor Mullins, would you like to say
Yes.
about the well-being and mental health and well-being and portfolio that you have? Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't say anything to Councillor Johns just then because I knew I was probably going to come in now. But I mean, I was grateful to hear what he had to say, and I was grateful to hear that he picked up the thing about statutory and non-statutory, because that is the horns of a dilemma for us all, especially in these days of austerity, which we seem to be heading into. I mean, health and well-being is absolutely vital to the town and its residents, and it's not statutory, most of what we do, but if we don't do it, people suffer, people's health deteriorates. We're seeing during this lockdown a serious growth in depression across the whole country, actually, and there's been quite a spate of increased suicides and personal damage, personal injuries to one another that has happened, and people are self-harming and that sort of thing. So, you know, there is consequences to it, although we understand why the lockdown had to happen, and in a way it's about minimising the damage that can be done from the virus. But it has a spin-off. I've been talking to people who've been sort of working from home lately, who find they don't have to go into the office and that sort of thing. Whilst none of them seem to miss the travelling journey to get into work, which can be considerable, most of them miss the company of their fellow workmates and the one-to-one associations or the group associations that we normally expect to be involved in. And I actually do that on the council when I'm doing this sort of meeting as well. I mean, as nice as everybody looks on a TV screen, it's not like sitting in a room and actually talking one-to-one to people and understanding body language, emotion, and getting involved in that sort of way with your fellow colleagues. So, I mean, we sometime or other, there's got to be a rebalancing of how we go back to dealing with our business on a day-to-day basis, and indeed our recreation, which is what we're all looking at. I've been keeping an eye on things opening up, how we can see Tilgate Park opening up again, whether we can see K2 opening up again, whether we can see the Horth opening up again, whether we can actually start to play football again, and whether our community centres could be booked again. And there's so much in there at the moment, for the 3 months or so anyway, has been closed down. and progressively we've got to find ways of getting back to normal. But I'm very aware of what's happened, I think in Leeds, where they've reversed it back again because of the surge in the virus infection. So we've got to be able to deal with it in a way that means that we don't put our residents and visitors at risk by coming to Crawley and enjoying the facilities. I mean, but I just wanted to emphasise that the health and wellbeing angle of my portfolio is very important to help protect against depression, to keep people fit, to actually build happiness amongst people, because it's very important that people are quite happy in their daily lives. If they're not happy, everything else falls apart. We have to look at what's going to happen with unemployment in Crawley. You know, that's very worrying, and where we're going with that. So I don't know. Did you want to say something?
No, sorry. I was just trying to draw you into the climate change.
Well,
and open spaces, and rather than the COVID situation.
Okay, I'll get there. But I mean, these are all things that are just on my mind, and things I worry about, and it's all part of my portfolio. And you did introduce me to speak on my portfolio, so it is part of it. But I mean, yeah, the balanced society, and that includes housing need and jobs as well. But I'll leave that there then, as you requested. On the open spaces, I mean, they're so vital. You know, we have something like 44 football fields, for example, in Crawley. Not all of them are usable in inclement weather, but all of them are usable some part of the year round. And we have many football teams, I don't know how many exactly, and many clubs and people that, you know, what we found is physical exercise is very important generally to human beings, and people like to go out and do physical things. We have open air gym at Tilgate. I mean, I'd like to see one at Goffs Park as another move. We have been talking about that. And am I missing something here still? Go
yeah,
on,
we're still not on climate, on the impact of this sort of climate change, really, and that aspect. I can absolutely understand the health and well-being and the importance of outside spaces for health and well-being, but we need to focus on the climate change aspect and that side of things tonight. So, is there any questions for Chris on the climate change aspects of his portfolio that anybody would like to ask? I'm not sure that I've got any questions on open spaces. Obviously, as I say, you know, I believe they are vital for our health, but they're also very important for the cooling of the air, the biodiversity, and all that kind of thing. Again, and I think that, you know, we should do as much as we can to protect them for everybody to use. And I know you're very keen on allotments, and I agree. And also there's quite a lot going on at the moment, lot of general swell of opinion about community gardens, and I wondered if you had any information on the community gardens that seem to be growing in popularity as well as the allotments.
No, I can I speak? Yeah, I love the idea of community gardens, and I like the idea of people getting involved in community gardens, and we ought to really be doing as much work in the areas as we can to bring that forward. We've had various I've forgotten the name of it now. We had this thing in Bewbush, it's gone from me now, the name, where we got people cleaning up and tidying up the grow beds there, and they were working on those, bringing the community together. They're very important. generally speaking, getting people active in doing things like that is vital. The air content in Crawley is always going to be controlled to some extent by the airport. And at the moment, I live very near the airport, and our air is fresh and clear, and we don't get any noise from the aeroplanes. The downside of that, of course, is that Crawley's economy has gone bust. So it's a trade-off, really. Yeah. How can you trade it all off and find answers to suit the needs of the people? Healthy air is good air, yeah. And there's too many particles in the air, and we shouldn't be breathing them. So the parks and open spaces with their trees, with their long walks, and all of that is really good. I mean, during all of this coronavirus, I've been walking up Cherry Lane quite a lot, and it's wonderful to walk out in the countryside and to get the fresh air and keep fit. Yeah, so my wife bought me one of these funny watches recently that tells me I've got to do 11,000 steps a day or something. But,
okay. So making a noise. Anybody else got any questions for Councillor Mullins? Nobody's coming back. So thank you very much, Chris, for your contribution this evening. And I would like to thank all of our guests for attending. I found this really interesting, and we can talk about this for a long time. So thank you all very much for your contribution. This was supposed to be our last meeting, and it's certainly a very complex one within the framework that we published way back in January. So that your comments tonight will have assisted the panel in looking towards making some recommendations, which we will be doing in the future. Now, oh, that's not the right thing. That's not the right page at all. So we're now going to go on to some more general updates and things. So I don't. You can stay and listen, or you can leave the meeting. So thank you very much for to Kate, to Richard, to Elizabeth, Karen. I haven't spoken to Karen as well. Councillor Johans and Councillor Mullins for being with us tonight. As I say, we're going on now to look at some general updates, because we need to reschedule the meetings that we missed earlier on to do with commercial and business premises, and also Crawley homes and domestic buildings. We need to have a look at to reschedule those meetings, and we've got the following dates that have been proposed for those. We've got the 10th of September, which is a Thursday. We've got Wednesday the 23rd of September, Monday the 12th of October, and Wednesday the 14th of October. And I don't know whether committee members have any preferences. What I would hope is that maybe we'd have one on the 10th of September and then perhaps the 12th of October. Please, can you committee members confirm their availability on those days?
Councillor Lunnan, you're now live.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I can't confirm my availability because my job role is changing, and I don't know what dates I'll be working, but some days I'll be working later. So unfortunately, for the time being, I can't commit to anything. So I'll just have to wait and see and go forward from there for my availability. I'm afraid, sorry, it's a bit useless, but I can't do anything about that.
Councillor Penlington.
I'm good for any of the dates that you've suggested at this point in time, so I'm happy to fit in with anybody else.
Councillor Jekyll.
Councillor Hart, have you got any preference on dates?
No, I've got the diary in my hand, and as far as I can see, all four of them are okay. But I would go. I would say I would go with the 10th and the 12th of September and October respectively. They're both fine.
Lovely, thank you. Is Councillor Firevash?
Hi, yeah, I can take any of those dates as well. Doesn't really make any difference to me.
Chair, obviously we need to depend on witness availability, so and we need to maintain a quorum, but if you're happy to go with those, I can liaise with other officers and witnesses if you're happy, if you're happy with that.
I think that's lovely. If we try for the 10th of September and the 12th of October as our first choice and see whether the witnesses are available, that would work. And then obviously we'll liaise with Councillor Lunland to see nearer the time. It's tricky, but yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. So there's no supplementary agenda, and the business of this meeting scrutiny panel is finished. It's a long meeting, so thank you all very much for your contributions. It's all those people that didn't speak. I've just noticed that not everybody spoke, which is unfortunate. So thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate your contributions, and as I say, we will use those contributions to sort out some recommendations when we're through. So the meeting is closed at 8:12. Thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank